Right, this last section is a big section. I'm going to take it as quickly as I possibly can. So, how are the Indians defeated? So, there's four things we're going to look at here. And primarily, the media or the newspapers or the attitudes in the East were against Indians. This is a typical uh, opinion of Indians that are attacking women and children, taking children hostage, which is obviously completely ridiculous and exaggerated. Um, so there was two types of people: people who wanted to exterminate them, and they were the people like miners, homesteaders, people who had very close contact with the Indians, and they wanted to get rid of them because they wanted their land effectively. And also there's people in the East, like negotiators, and they believed that these were people like people who worked at the Indian agencies or had dealings with Indians and realised, for what it was, and they wanted to negotiate. Now, inevitably, these negotiations went round in circles. So, for example, the Fort Laramie Treaty, they signed the peace treaty, and the miners and settlers discovered gold. They broke the peace treaty, for example, in the Black Hills. The Indians obviously attacked the settlers because it was land sacred to them. The army was then logically sent in to protect the settlers. The army defeated the Indians in the end because they had better weapons and heavier weapons and superior numbers. The Indians surrendered and they re-signed another treaty. So it went round and round and round and round and round like that. I've done this bit. So by 1840, the Great Plains were Indian. Literally, within 55 years, they were resigned to these reservations. Very, very well. They're quite big areas, but they're very poor land. They couldn't really farm there. It was a land that nobody really wanted. Like if you look, a lot of those are either very in the north where it's cold, or sort of the Texas arid area or New Mexico area down there in the southwest. The Indians didn't sit there twiddling their thumbs. There was a series of things which we looked at. People like Little Crow, Red Cloud and Sitting Bull all fought back for a variety of reasons, some more successfully than others. Red Cloud was more successful and really defeated the US Army, but could never take over a fort. That was a big problem for him. Now the US Army itself suffered from a series of problems. So mentally, a lot of them were immigrants. They weren't really committed to the American program. It was very boring, isolated, living in a fort, middle of nowhere. They weren't going to saloons like the cowboys were, drinking all the time. It was really, really boring on that. They had poor leadership. Their equipment was very poor. A lot of them only had sabres, swords, didn't really have guns. It was physically draining. They didn't know where the Indians were, so they were sent out on patrol. It's a very, very difficult situation for the US Army, and they struggled at times to defeat. They just weren't motivated to the same degree the Indians were. However, they did have a couple of benefits. They recruited Indian scouts, so they relied on traditional rivalries between groups like the Crow and the Sioux. They built forts which gave them a defensive capability. They could keep all their stores, and the Indians lacked heavy weapons to break down the fences that they built. They also, people like General Sheridan, believed in what they called total war. And total war was the destruction of Indian villages and women and children when the men were off, the braves were off hunting. And also the Civil War, when that finished, what happened there, the really experienced battle-hardy troops took over from the more conscripted troops, and they basically were better troops and much more capable of defeating the Indians. This is one of their favourite questions. Why was Custer responsible for the defeat? How far was he responsible for the defeat? And really, this is a yes and no question. Make sure you answer a balanced question on this, quite important. So, yes, he was responsible. He was vain, he was arrogant, he disobeyed orders. He rode through the night through the Wolf Mountains, so when he arrived, his men were tired and basically had enough. When he actually arrived there, he should have really taken stock of the situation and realised he was massively outnumbered. He split his forces again. So, yes, he was. Of course he was. However, you have to say that he wasn't as well, because the General Sheridan's plan was faulty to begin with. They split the groups into three over a massive area. There's no way for them to communicate. They had no idea how many Indians were actually there. Also, on the way there was an attack at Rosebud, and a lot of the men were turned back, and that was Crazy Horse attack. And then again, when they met up, General Terry divided them again. So it was General Sheridan and General Terry who made decisions to split the forces, and also there was a lot more Indians, and they had better weapons like the Winchester shotgun, which had a vigorous pumping action and enabled them to fire as much as they possibly could. So really, really different reasons, but if a different general would have lost that battle, probably not. They probably wouldn't have attacked in the first place. But he wanted the glory of defeating the Indians on the plains for the last time. This could be a question here, and this is going to be my last thing, is how did the reservations destroy Indian culture? Well, a number of reasons here. They split the reservations into smaller groups territorially. Politically, they decided to weaken the power and authority of the chiefs. They took control of legal matters away from the chiefs in terms of food rations and things like that. The Dawes Act broke up reservation lands into individual pots, so the chiefs no longer gave out the land that was given to the Indian agents, who were often corrupt. There's economic reasons. They weren't allowed to leave the reservations. They weren't allowed to hunt. There was no buffaloes to hunt, so they had no way of currency trading, food, whatever. There's religious reasons. They banned the sun dance, for example. The medicine man's power was really reduced. And I think the saddest thing of all, they sent off young boys and girls off to schools in the East and tried to educate them and make them Christians and all that sort of thing, to really destroy their culture at its complete heart.